Well, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner yesterday testified that it will take 5 to 7 years to wind down mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and that not all the losses will be recovered for taxpayers. We are joined this morning by two guests who have been very deeply involved in the government mortgage market. Former Ginnie Mae president under both the Bush and Obama administrations and chairman of the Collingwood Group, Joe Murin, who is sitting on the left, and former Federal Housing Finance Agency director under George W. Bush and also the vice chairman now of W.L. Ross and Company, Jim Lockhart. Both are here speaking on a Bloomberg Link panel on the future of GSEs. Those are otherwise known as government-sponsored enterprises. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Certainly a fascinating discussion. You heard Geithner take some heat from the lawmakers, on what is the future of Fannie and Freddie. First off, how do you think he did? I mean, is Treasury doing the right thing with these two giants? And Jim, let me start with you.
Well, I think he did very well yesterday, actually. It's a tough topic and it's very political. But we need to, over time, move Fannie and Freddie more to the private sector. And that's what he was talking about. Now, he has three alternatives. One that's a pure private sector alternative, and one that's keeping a catastrophic government insurance program.
Right. Joe?
Yes.
Of those options, do any of those seem workable to you?
Well, I think probably 2 and 3 are more workable from my perspective, where government has some involvement, at least from the investor perspective, and maybe over a given period of time, a time-certain period. But I think we have to start with how important home ownership is to America, and we have to define that because it's been demonized over the past 2.5 years in a lot of ways. So I think we have to understand what that is and then create the housing finance system to support it. And I'm sure that in some way, shape, or form, although I do very much agree with Jim that this should be privatized. At least the credit side should be privatized initially, and then maybe the P&I could be, in fact, have some government responsibility in catastrophic situations. But there's a lot.
So the lending side of it
should be privatized.
Yes. Okay.
And all the credit losses should be taken by the private sector, for sure.
Okay, but what about the securitization side of it?
Now, the principal and interest to the investors, it may take some type of transition to keep the investors still providing liquidity over a time-certain period. So over the next 5 or 10 years, maybe, in fact, that could happen.
But Geithner says, what's interesting is that he says he's not for all-out privatization, I think, because, the government has to have some sort of protector role, right? We're talking about people's homes here. Sure. It needs to have a protector role. It has to have some sort of involvement. Yeah,
and certainly over the 5 to 7 year period, it's going to have that. What we need to do is to cut back the government involvement. It's now 90%. Right. It used to be about 30%. It probably should even be less than 30% in the mortgage market. One piece that I would agree that shouldn't necessarily be privatized is, and they've talked about, is the multifamily area. That's actually been extremely successful in Fannie and Freddie throughout this crisis. So that's an area that maybe over time doesn't need to be because it's working very well. On the single family side, it will need some sort of catastrophic government protection for a reasonably long while. The other important thing he said yesterday that I think was the first time I heard it say that there's good systems there and there's good people there, so we've got to be careful as we restructure these companies that we build on what's good.
Right, and he's also very aware of whether or not taxpayers will eventually make their money back. I think there's, we put $150 billion, I think, into both Fannie and Freddie. I think there's a loss estimate of what, $75 billion or something, or the $75 billion has to be paid back to the taxpayers. In your best estimation, how much will the taxpayers get back?
Well, right now, the upper end of what the contribution is going to be is in the 360 to 380 range. So we still have a ways to go. We can't forget that both Fannie and Freddie have about $5 trillion on off-balance sheet liability. So, over a period of time, this is where, Jim and I were talking about the good bank, bad bank issue. You could over a period of time could make some of that up, but it still has to be dealt with because $5 trillion is a lot of off-balance sheet lending.
They're not going to pay it back. I'll flat out say that.
Really? You mean not pay any of it back, or
the $150 billion? They're close to breaking even one of them made money in the last quarter, but they also have a 10% dividend on their preferred stock, and as long as that dividend stays there, they're going to continue to have to borrow to pay the dividend, basically.
So the taxpayers are out of luck then with this?
I think there was a big government subsidy, and the taxpayers are now paying for that government subsidy.
Yeah, they're borrowing the 10% dividend from Treasury to pay Treasury.
Right, well, exactly. So it's just sort of escalating them, one on top of the other. But the bottom line, and Joe, you mentioned it right from the beginning, is that is there any type of reform, though, that is not going to hit the mortgage owner, the homeowner? Because it seems in all of these options, your mortgage is going to go up no matter what, right?
There was a subsidy, and if that subsidy goes away, your cost of mortgages is going to go up, yes.
There's no question about it. The homeowner is going to have to ante up and put a little bit more skin in the game than they have in the past, and both in rate and with some sort of down payment. So I think that's
so no matter what reform, they're going to have to pay more than on their home. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Certainly a very interesting topic, fascinating topic. We've been talking about Fannie and Freddie. That was Joe Murin and also Jim Lockhart talking about the future of both of those agencies.